I'm Rosalyn Harper, and I'm representing the West Side. No particular neighborhood name, but the West Side. Okay.
And I'm Morocco Coleman, and like Rosalyn, we grew up near each other, so I represent the West Side, a little bit of 4th Ward, and maybe a little bit of Collier Heights.
The West Side was a thriving neighborhood, big neighborhood. One of my fondest recollections, and I didn't come to this until I was an adult, was that, and after the Civil Rights Movement, that I realized that we didn't have to go off the West Side to do anything, all right? If we needed doctor, dentist, lawyer, they were all along what was then Hunter Street, now Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. But you could find that on Hunter Street. All the businesses were black owned. Dry cleaners, restaurants, doctors, lawyers, dentists, druggists, as they were called at the time. There were 3 black-owned drugstores on Hunter Street. And so it was a very close community where you could do anything and everything, and you had access to everything you wanted. And in fact, it was in the shadow of downtown. So you just got on the number 3 West Fair of the 13 West Hunter and rode downtown if you wanted to, or you could walk, and you were right at Rich's department store. So it was just a self-contained. We had our own library at the corner of Martin Luther King, Hunter Street then, and Morris Brown Drive. So the library was there, the school was there, Booker Telfair Washington High School, all of the services you needed there, and the Colonial store was right there on Ashby Street, and sometimes our parents might venture out toward Lenox, but basically it was a fun place to grow up. It was rich with history. We were in the shadow of the entire Atlanta University Center. So it was great.
Let's not forget the Ashby Theater. The Ashby Theater was like 2 doors from Ashby Street, which is now, what's the name of Ashby Street?
Joseph Lowry, yes.
Joseph Lowry Boulevard and Martin Luther King. But to me, it was Ashby Street and Martin Luther King was Hunter Street. So a marker, when you tell somebody or give them directions, Hunter and Ashby, the intersection. So the Ashby Theater was 2 doors from Ashby Street. And that was where everybody went on Saturday mornings and stayed till 6 o'clock in the evening, watching all of the movies and cartoons. And as Rosalyn said, Hunter Street was our Lenox Square. You had clothing stores. You even had the baseball great Don Clendenin. His father was a member of the old Negro Baseball League. And so his father had a bar, but as I think back on it, his bar right there on Hunter Street would be what you would really call a sports bar. Next door to the Ashby Theater, you had the Young's Barbershop, and that was the meeting place of all the men of the community, getting their haircuts and watching the baseball game on a little black and white TV with a 13-inch screen on it. Pascal's Restaurant, and then you had Frazier's Restaurant. Well, Frazier was an older lady, Mrs. Frazier, and she had her restaurant set up as such that she had white tablecloths, expensive silverware, and so you had class, you had clothing stores, you had the Dairy Queens and the shops where you could get your little sweets and whatnot.
First place I saw Stevie Wonder, when he was little Stevie Wonder, he was 12 or 13 years old, was at the Music Inn on Hunter Street. Yeah, he was doing the song Fingertips. He was when it was when it was first released, and he was at the Music Inn singing Fingertips. So we had even cab companies. You had cab companies, black-owned cab companies on the West Side. The irregular economy, which existed within the geopolitical space of the ghetto, which white folks call it, was alive and well on Hunter and Ashby. You had the funeral homes, Sellers Brothers, Andrews down the street on Ashby Street. You had Ivy Brothers, now Williams, up the street here on Fair Street. So you had 3 or 4 funeral homes right there in that area, all right, all black owned. And there were just churches. You had a church and a liquor store on every corner. I know you knew all the families that owned those funeral homes. Then you had the churches, the largest Pentecostal church, Bethlehem, which is right still on Hunter Street, Martin Luther King. You had, what was the name of Fisher's old church? It became West Hunter's. It was West Hunter. Yeah, it was West Hunter Baptist Church, right. Mm-hmm. That Dr. Abernathy later became pastor of. They used the numbers runners. That existed on Hunter Street too.
Which they turned it into now.
It's legal.
It's the lottery.
It's the lottery.
But back then, you had guys like my cousin's father. He owned a cab company. It was Wilson Cab Company. And that was a thriving business, but also out of his cab business, he was one of the big numbers men on the West Side. And then you had a numbers kingpin on the east side of town and the south side of town. So all 4 quadrants had a couple of numbers kingpins. And these were the men that were the banks for the lottery money. And you had people that would come in, or little old ladies, or you had runners that would go to Miss Luby Bell's house, and she would give them like 50 cents to play the number for her. And if it hit, she would get maybe, let me see, what was it? $1 would bring you with $6 or $60 or something like that. And so the banker was the money man. And so each one of these bankers around the different quadrants, back in the 30s, that same cousin's mother was going to Morris Brown. And so they were a mainstay in the community. You know, they would take care of the older people and send some kids to college.
Oh yeah, if you wanted your kid to go to college and you couldn't afford, Cato was the person that probably educated you. Just go to Cato. And just to tell the truth about it, the preachers and anybody else who needed financial help, you knew where to go. Cato, if you wanted your kid to go to college and you couldn't afford to send them, the word was you go to Cato, and if they wanted to, were willing to go to Morris Brown, he was going to pay the tuition. So it was a very upsetting thing on the West Side when Cato was killed, and it was theorized that he was killed by some younger guys who, of course, didn't know anything about all of this. This was a whole 2 generations probably away that were trying to rob it. So these guys garnered respect, all right, because not only did they make money, but they were willing to help others with their money. And of course, you had people who looked down on it, but at the same time, that was the irregular economy which existed within this geopolitical space. You always went to the church. I mean, if you notice right down, how many churches you got right there on Ashby Street, but you always knew what preachers or what church you could go to ask for help. It was the church. You were identified by where you went to school and what church you went to. All right. Where do I know you from? What church you go to? What school? What high school did you go to? Mostly high school. When I say identified by the school, it was the high schools because there were 6 or 7 black high schools before integration, and you were identified by the high school that you went to and the church that you went to, and discipline was not an issue because you went to. Your teachers lived in your neighborhood. They went to church with you sometimes. So, you know, if the neighborhood watch person, as you all call it now, and we called them Miss So-and-so and Miss So-and-so and Miss So-and-so caught you wrong, the message was there before you got home. And Mama was standing there waiting on you. Miss So-and-so said, you didn't dispute that. So you were gonna get a spanking by Miss So-and-so for catching you wrong, and then when you got home and she'd already called to tell your mother about it, you were gonna get another one.
In the community, we had a bank.
Yeah.
We had Citizens
right.
Trust Bank across from Washington High School. And we had 2 hospitals, 2 black hospitals.
That's right.
Across the street from Washington High School was Harris Hospital, and that was founded by Dr. Harris, whose daughter we grew up with. And then about 6 blocks from there was McClendon Hospital, founded by Dr. McClendon. When you talk about people from the community in the areas we grew up, a good friend of mine, he's a World War II veteran. He passed maybe 10, 12 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. He was the founder of the Morehouse School of Medicine, Dr. Clint Warner. Now, Dr. Warner was instrumental in during the Civil Rights Movement because some of the demonstrators during the Civil Rights Movement were going down to Alabama to protest, and they knew that they were probably going to be beaten by the cops and the state patrol and whatnot when they got there to demonstrate. And so they asked Dr. Warner to come and provide medical services to anybody that was injured. And he told them, he says, well, I'm not going down to Alabama. He says, but I'll tell you this, anybody that needs my services, you get them back to Atlanta and get them to me, and he would take care of them. And so he was very instrumental in a lot of community affairs and contributing to the community. And as I said, he was one of the founders of the Morehouse School of Medicine. And then right up the streets, as Rosalyn mentioned, we had the AU Center. So you had Morris Brown College on Hunter Street, and Morris Brown College had a beautiful stadium. And that stadium was used for Morris Brown's football games, but it was also accessible for high school football games and other activities. Many of us had friends or family connections with the AU Center.
The AU Center was the largest consortium of historically black colleges and universities in the world, not the United States, but in the world. And so we had exposure and access to many different things that other people, I found out as a freshman at Spelman, did not have access to. So I think the upbringing that we had and the experiences that we had growing up here were unique to for the city. Type of exposure and many of the experiences that we had growing up were very unique to this area. You know, I would lift every voice and sing.
Yeah.
That's what I sang in place of the Star Spangled Banner in school. And I'm having people look at me when we get to be freshmen saying, how you know that song? What? Why don't you know it? Was my question, you know, because I grew up singing it. The first school song that I can remember singing was Morehouse, Dear Old Morehouse, because that's what I heard so I did not think that a college education was unusual. I think I've known I was going to do that since I was old enough to know what school was. It just wasn't unusual. I mean, I went to nursery school on the campus of Spelman College, at Spelman Nursery School. So it was just, and I think that was unique to this area.
I'm going to take a license and say it's the largest black high school in the city of Atlanta, possibly in the southeastern region of this country during our time. But many of our high school teachers were masters and graduate degrees, okay? And then they were a part of the community. And in many cases, many of our instructors were friends with our parents. So
that high school served 5 different public housing projects. And on any given day at Booker T. Washington High School, there were 3,000 students there. Any given day. All right.
Another unique thing too of Atlanta, if you met somebody from one of the other 6 high schools spread out throughout the city of Atlanta, when they gave you their phone number, you could tell where they lived, what part of the city of Atlanta they lived. You had the Amherst and the Sycamores, that was the Westside, and the Plaza. Jackson, you had over in Fourth Ward. Murray was out in Pryor Road area, East Atlanta. So yes, a lot of uniqueness about Atlanta, but and I've heard people that have come here to go to college or come here to visit back in my high school days and even all the way up to now. And people would say, I got here and it was so, being the cradle of the civil rights movement, they're very much impressed with the progress of Atlanta. But one of the main things that I would hear is like, y'all are clique down here. And when I thought about it, it's not a clique, but it's again, that community. Well, I see the changes through gentrification. It's just now starting to touch the west side. Not profoundly yet, but you can see the imprint but the footprint of the gentrification or a new city developing, mostly in the downtown corridor and spreading out from the downtown in all directions. But it has.
I want to see it develop more into the business enclave that it was before. It's growing. It's growing. Now you've got the Chick-fil-A and you've got, the Busy Bee has remained.
Walmart.
And Walmart has come. But I don't see the activity and the hominess of the West Side that I used to see. And I think everything changes, okay? Maybe this is the new West Side, but I still like the West Side. I still like it, yeah. When I was teaching at Clark Atlanta, I was sitting there looking one day and I said, why are the young people so different? I know times change, people change, everything changes. Change is good, and the only constant is change. But I started seeing a difference in the way younger people related to their seniors, those that were older than them. And the sense of community and being asked questions in class like, why do we need to know all this black stuff? And it just took my breath away. why we need. And I said, and I was talking with one of my aunts who was by that time in her 80s, I think. And she said, I keep telling y'all and you don't hear me. Integration was one of the worst things that ever happened to us. Because you did not, what we did was gave up our way of life in order to assimilate to the ways of another people. These kids don't understand what got them where they are now. They don't understand what it took to get here. So they don't have any respect for it.
Our friend, Dr. George Ann Thomas, was very much involved in the AU Center along with another late friend of mine, Lonnie King. And they were involved in the galvanizing the AU Center into the civil rights movement. And they marched on downtown, the Rich's department stores, the Davidson's department stores, the Lane Bryant's, the Fox Theater. And our generation going to college, we 4 years younger, but we fall into that same category. And so we became very active in the civil rights movement. And we knocked down the door of discrimination and segregation. But I hold us responsible too because it carries a lot of weight. We knocked down that door, and now you can go downtown in the 70s or going into the 80s. You can go into the restaurants, you can go into the hotels now, you can go into the, sit down and eat in the restaurants, etc. Or you go in the front door of the Fox Theater where we used to have to go up to the way up the steps in the back and sit up in the top once you got there. But once we knocked that door down, I have some friends that were involved in the civil rights movement, but they were freedom riders. They rode on Greyhound buses from Nashville, Tennessee, and from the north, coming down to go to Alabama and Mississippi among the Ku Klux Klan that was waiting there to kill them when they got there, just to show interstate travel, and you could sit on the front of a bus. Those buses sometimes were burned. They were beaten as the civil rights folk that went to the department stores and whatnot. So that was some tough times, and some lives were lost. Have gone into coaching, teaching, or into some profession where you are about the least of them, where you're giving back and you don't leave any behind, and you don't give a hand out, you give a hand up. And so that's one of the things that has been very important to me in my formative years, and even to this day, I still carry those principles. And as I see my peers, throughout the city or in some other cities as I travel, we all look at each other and start singing the great old YMCA day camp song. And so, yeah, that was a piece of foundation that I still carry today. I'm a YMCA day camper, the greatest in the land. I hike and swim, play ball, and the greatest in the land. If you ever see me in action, you know I'll understand. I'm a YMCA day camper, the greatest in the land. So, I didn't know what a rich childhood I had. I'm not talking about money, because that, we were all sculpting for that. But I'm talking about what a rich childhood I had in terms of experiences, in terms of people who truly cared about me and wanted nothing but the best for me. Our generation, too, made such a sacrifice in the form of Vietnam and young black males. Morocco was a part of that sacrifice. And they left here as young college students, high school graduates. Some of them had never held a gun in their life, but they were taking 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I remember the buses coming through the campus to try to encourage the young men to enlist.
And a lot of the tricks they had not to, like biting their tongue to spit the blood in their urine so that they couldn't pass the test, were the ones who were on those front lines in Vietnam. A war that was never declared and were totally disrespected when they got back. And many of them came back broken, psychologically, physically, emotionally, and there were no services for them when they got back. There were none. They were totally disrespected, but the sacrifice was huge. And I understand totally why. I know it's totally why when we see young black people acting out in various ways that we know are detrimental and not conducive to the spirit of community, it makes me angry. It makes me very angry because I know the price that was paid. And I'm glad that I came up in a time when we were taught that somebody paid a price for you to be here. I didn't take it for granted. I did not take being able to go to the symphony or the ballet or the museum or anything that other black kids in this city may not have been able to go to, but I could simply because I went to elementary school on Morris Brown's campus, which was then Oglethorpe Elementary. Sometimes we had a special day. The other black elementary schools went too. They couldn't go on the same day. We couldn't go on the same day that the white students went. All right? But we had teachers who fought for us to be exposed to everything that they could expose us to. They used to take that mimeograph machine and crank out copies of so we could have stuff to read. And they used to teach us, you can't afford to be as good. You gotta be better. You gotta be twice as good. You gotta dig for it. You got to fight for it. And some of us got there and doggone it, we turned our back. Some of us turned our back on those who were still struggling. My grandfather worked on the railroad, and I forgot what he was born in, but he worked on the railroad. That was a big job. That was a big job, shoveling coal on the railroad until they finally, by the time he was ready to retire, they were letting black men do Pullman porters. All right, that was a good job, a big job. One of the first unions grew out of that, the Pullman, the sleeping car porters. Yeah, grew out of that. So, but our kids don't know of anything about that now.
Some of our friends are now either just retiring or, well, most of them are starting to retire now, that retired from the railroad as engineers driving the trains. Those were the sacrifices. But you know what, I look back on our parents in the 40s and 50s, no, let's say 30s, 40s, and 50s, with segregation, with low wages, with the literal foot on the collective necks. Our parents, when you look at it, when you really look at it microscopically, they did more for us. They accomplished more with less and gave us, I used to say this guardedly, they had less and they gave us more than we could probably ever give our kids and leave to them.